Hello, everyone, and welcome to Insight Live, the IT Experts Take. Today, we're going to be talking about PCI 4.0, how companies can best approach the compliance changes coming in 2024. And I've got two PCI rock stars with me to talk about this. We have Bob Skinner, who's a senior security principal, and Scott Swearin, who is also a senior security principal here with me at Insight. And I'm Jason Rader, your host. I'm Insight's Chief Information Security Officer. So, gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good afternoon.
So we have a lot of folks who are loyal watchers of the broadcast, and just to kind of set the stage for those who aren't necessarily familiar, because we throw around PCI like it's just part of our normal vernacular, why don't we take a shot at explaining what PCI is to the uninitiated?
So I can start. PCI stands for Payment Card Industry. And it's the group that was put together by the major card brands, MasterCard, Visa, Discover, JCP, and American Express, to form security standards for the protection of the card data.
Nice. And I remember this back in the day, they all had separate standards, and that was a lot of fun if you were dealing from a security perspective with a bunch of different environments, or depending on who was processing the cards. And so they came together to make it easier for everybody. And one of the points that we made earlier is that these aren't like rockstar, you will never have a issue with security standards. These are typically the standards of good practice that everybody should have to be in the business of processing credit card transactions. Fair to say?
Yeah, it's fair to say. And from the PCI perspective, a lot of the specific controls are based upon where they see the breaches happening, which are the areas that need the stronger security.
A good point. I think that's a good. So based on the changes between this standard, the previous standard, and this one, it's based where they think the focus should be applied. That's a good point. I like it. So why don't? I'm sorry, Bob. Did you have anything that you wanted to ask? Sorry,
Don't think of the standard as here's all we can do. It's a good starting baseline. You can always enhance your security program and posture above and beyond what's in the standard.
Yeah, and I think, there's tons of newer standards that are out. And I think about it, and they recently did some stuff for critical infrastructure for oil and gas and those types of things from TSA. Whenever I think of those, and this is no slight to any of our folks out there, but that's usually when an industry's gotten so far behind the maturity curve that they need to kind of put some mandatory settings out there so that everybody understands where they need to be. And what I've always loved about PCI is it's very it's probably the most prescriptive, or it was at some point, of the standards. So it didn't leave a lot of, a lot of the government standards kind of were like generic to the point to where they weren't super helpful to the average organization. So I love how they've been prescriptive in the past.
That does help a lot of companies. Yeah, I would say that does help a lot of companies. So especially the less mature ones, they don't have to think about what control to implement. It's pretty much being told what to do.
Yeah.
At the same time, some of it's prescriptive, and then for the elements that are not, that sort of leaves the client or the customer wondering, what am I supposed to do here? And leaves them in a quandary as well.
Yeah, and I recall back in, as this standard has progressed, there was a time where like virtualization wasn't even called out in the standard, and you couldn't use a virtualized environment until they actually defined it. So it does some organizations don't do certain aspects of things until this standard gets to the point to where it allows those, because, this, for some non-publicly traded entities, this is kind of their big standard.
And that's one of the changes that's coming with 4.0 is now giving companies more of a choice on how to implement some of these controls, and that you could go with that prescribed route, or you can now use what they call a customized approach for those environments that are taking and using new technologies that don't necessarily conform to a lot of what you would think of as the traditional approach to securing an environment.
Perfect. So let's talk about that. So let's talk about, this doesn't go in until 2024. Is that accurate?
Well, it's 2024 for the first version and 2025 for the optional component. Well, not the optional, for the best practice components.
Gotcha. So,
and it's the difference here. Normally, the change to a new version would be January 1. This is April 1, after March 31st of 2024. You get an extra quarter to stay with the old version.
That's nice. April 1st is always a terrible time to make things happen, in my opinion, but at any rate, at least in the US.
Well, maybe they'll come back and say, we're just kidding about the 4.0.
That would be epic. I would totally advise they do that. So why should folks, let's talk about that aspect, Scott, that you brought up. Talk about some of the custom versus the prescribed aspects of this, or the leeway that we have the new standard.
Yeah, so a lot of companies were pushing back, saying we don't always do things the way you tell us to do it.
Right.
And you hear a lot of talk about wanting to take more of a risk-based approach.
Yep.
So the customized approach is the council's initiative or effort to accommodate that. With the customized approach, you have to show you're meeting the intent of the original control, and the risk-based component that comes in. Part of doing so, you have to perform a risk assessment on that specific control. They call it a targeted risk assessment, to show how the risk is being mitigated by the alternate method of implementing the control as opposed to the prescribed method.
I like that a lot. And it gives people that are forward leaning from a tech perspective. I mean, because really there would be a complaint potentially of, hey, we're doing this stuff that is so far ahead that you haven't even defined it for the vast majority of the maturity curve. So I love that flexibility that we're given at this point.
And it's on our per control basis, which is really nice. You don't have to, it's not an all or nothing. It's this control can be traditional. The next one can be customized, even within a particular control. Your Windows environments can be traditional and your cloud environment can be customized.
I like that a lot. I think, and that's the other thing. Some of the other regulatory bodies, if you will, kind of have a situation where, sorry, I'm getting feedback. Somebody's speaker's a little high. Have a situation where they don't give a lot of flexibility, if you will. And I think that it shows that the PCI, in doing this, they really want to enable you to transact. It's not in their best interest to keep you from processing credit card transactions.
Correct.
Well,
lots of money on the line for the banks, for the merchants, for a lot of people involved, and they want to do it securely because nobody wants to take on those liability and the dollars that converts to.
Totally. So what are some of the questions that people are asking you? I know you guys both deal, with client facing every single day. What are some of the questions that are being asked about this?
Well, how much more is it going to cost me?
That's true.
Right. That's an obvious one. But right now, they're being asked, or I'm being asked about what are some of the technological changes that are coming along. So what investments are they going to have to make to conform with the new standard, as far as in hardware, software, licensing, cloud services, whatever it might be. And the other aspect, and this is, we always get this with PCI, is how much more documentation am I going to have to write?
Gotcha. So now you got to tell me what the answers are. Go ahead, Bob.
How much more is it going to cost to do the assessment? How can I still narrow down my scope? How much more impact? What's the big impact of all these changes?
Yeah, no, I love it. And I think, from our perspective at Insight, we provide this as a consulting service. So that is a good point, especially if they've got these now on a control by control basis, they can have a custom solution that obviously puts more effort on the QSA side of the house. So that probably would lead to be a higher price depending on how customized their environment is over the standard control set.
I think it depends on how well they actually document the effectiveness of their controls too.
A little bit of ownership, not a lot of bit of ownership back to the individuals. Yeah, which is fair. Again, I think that's, from a security perspective, I know not everybody can hire a ton of rock stars and have it at that level. But, again, what I always have liked about PCI is they push that, it's here's your responsibility, guys. We're trying to help you get to a certain level. But, you got to, even when you don't have a certain control in place, it's not like, no, fine, you're out of here. It's more of, tell us how you're going to fix this, or what are the other controls you're going to have in place as you're fixing this. That's a way better approach from a security perspective, because it's not like, we want to encourage people to do these things, and it helps them everywhere, not just within their PCI scope typically.
It helps with the relationship as well, because it's the difference of audit versus assess. the audit, I'm going to raise my hand and say, hey, I'm a great auditor. I found this bad thing you're doing. Where as an assessor, I can say, hey, here's what you need to fix, go fix it. And then we'll say you're doing well.
Love it. So, Scott, you mentioned technology. What are some of the big technology changes, if any, in the standard?
Yeah, so some of the big technology changes are a lot of them around application development. There was an option prior under the current standard to do code reviews by third party and look at it that perspective, or you had the choice of that or WAF, a web application firewall. The code review option is removed. So if you're not already using a WAF, now you are going to be required to use a WAF. Another big change is for log management. It used to be sufficient to just send logs to a centralized platform. Now you need to have actually something that consolidates it and reviews it in an automated way, not just have a human being crawling through it. A lot of companies, the most common technology would be a SIM, but most companies are probably there already. Another change where one's being removed is the disk encryption option is no longer an option. You must use, if you want to go the encryption route, you must encrypt the data, not the disk. Multi-factor authentication use is being expanded. So you may need to put a bigger investment to give MFA to more people than needed it prior, things like that.
All very sound security concepts regardless. Nice. Any other kind of procedural changes or anything along those lines?
Yeah, there's a bunch. So back to the e-commerce or web application perspective, there's now more requirements for you documenting the certificates that you use on your website to protect those sites, about the expiration dates and who responsible when they need to renew, and the strength of the encryption. It was before just enough to validate the strength of the key that's on there at that moment in time. Now there's a further requirement for the companies to manage those certificates actively. There's other changes around the website to maintain a list and maintain a list of the third-party APIs and other components that are in the code. And then the other one impacting it is now that you're now required to validate that essentially no man-in-the-middle attacks occurring. You have to confirm that any JavaScript that's pushed down to the browser is indeed the JavaScript that's intended to be there, and that thing got implemented or changed. So technologies are available to help you implement that into your code that gets pushed down to the client side. So they're making more responsibility, not just for what's on your infrastructure, but what you give to your customers and make them use. Putting more responsibility back on you for controlling what you push down.
I like that. And based on all the things that you kind of just said, I can think of specific things that have happened in the last 12 to 18 months that would have been the catalyst for those particular changes that come into play.
Back to the changes are based upon the breaches that they're seeing. So the JavaScript is to help prevent e-skimming, for example.
Yep.
And that's one of the new technologies that is being used to circumvent the other controls that have been put in place in the past. Now that they're being effective, they're finding new ways.
And so, and I know you're both familiar, but there's a lot of, these are changes. A lot of these changes aren't changes that are just easy, check the box. Oh, all we had to do was enable this kind of thing. These are things that even if the tech is available to the organization, there's still a operationalization of that tech and a, organizational change management aspect that is not a check the box type situation. How do you think clients are prepping for this kind of stuff? Not something you wait till last minute for, of course.
Yeah, so one of the big changes, then I'll let Bob chime in, is there's a new option to select on a per requirement basis for when the assessor comes in. You had the traditional in place or not in place, but now there's an option for in place with remediation. So what they're trying to do is track customers that are always waiting to the last minute to get the control in place. So while, yes, they did get it in control, they got it in place, it was a last minute thing or something they had to change. So that's something they're going to track. Now, how they're going to use that data is to be seen, but I think it's a method to try and find those companies that are not operationalizing the compliance and are treating it more as an annual exercise. Bob, I think you're more.
I was going to say that I've seen a lot of that over the years where yeah, we're doing these today. Well, tomorrow you stop as soon as the assessor walks out the door. I can't tell you how many times the clients come back to, well, we're not working on this right now because we're not being assessed. So when I walk in the door next week and you're being assessed, now you start working on it. Well, that's not meeting anywhere close to the intent of the framework.
Yeah.
I think,
Go ahead.
I would say a lot of the changes in how we assess companies now is not trying to determine whether the control's in place today, but the test is, has the control been in place over the past year? And that's a different mindset, different focus. Is we're trying to determine today, a year ago, have you been maintaining that compliance or not?
And I think, again, I'm a certified auditor as well. So it's one of those things where that check the box mentality, which has been around for a long time. And to be honest, I know we do that in our daily lives in a lot of different things, right? So I understand why we lean towards those types of things as individuals and humans. But it's one of those things that's really frustrating because we're still talking about the minimum standards that you should have from a security perspective anyway. And the fact that you're kind of, hedging on those things by, the assessor's gone, boom, security's over until the next year kind of thing. That's like a really bad position to have from a security perspective. But again, certain environments don't necessarily have the same risk as others. Not everybody who processes, certain levels of processing as they have already been defined. But it's, do you find that, have you guys run into clients that are just deciding to get out of the business altogether and outsource this because of the risk that it presents? Or is it, to me, it would seem it's more like, okay, this kind of fits in line with what we're already doing anyway. So let's just, make sure that we can align it appropriately for the QSAs to come in and audit. Which way do you think people are leaning?
I think clients are constantly looking for a way to reduce scope, because if you have a merchant account, a merchant ID, you'll never be 100% out of the PCI compliance game.
Sure.
And introduction of EMV technology makes it a lot easier to get that scope reduced. The number of service providers now providing hosted pages and hosted services, companies like Insight that provide managed services that alleviate the need to manage some of these operational ongoing tasks, is making it easier for clients to minimize their operational overhead and let other folks deal with it.
But they can't eliminate their responsibility because it's their client data, their public relations. If there's something bad happens,
their brand
will never totally eliminate their own responsibility.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, back in the people probably still say it today, but it was pretty commonplace for folks to say, "Oh, we moved this into the cloud. We're totally secure. The cloud providers got all this, right?" And no, that liability still rests. If you take the credit card number as an entity, you're still responsible for that transaction, regardless of who's processing it on the back end.
So I'll give you an example. This was from Monday, so this is really current. Have a client that's looking to engage a third party, and the marketing brochure says, if you use us, you won't have to manage PCI compliance. But then we got a copy of the actual contract that the client needs to sign if they're going to use the service, and there's language in there about them having to maintain PCI compliance. So marketing says you don't have to worry about it. Contract says something different. This was Monday.
We go back into the day where vendors would say, "Hey, if you buy this product, we'll take care. It'll cover PCI compliance for you," although it's one part of one requirement that they're covering.
Yeah, no, I've seen unscrupulous vendors in the past sell firewalls saying they're PCI compliant firewalls, and that's just infuriating. Yeah, exactly. So, what are some of the pitfalls that some advice we can give to folks as they're kind of marching towards the new standards, maintaining their, the current standard? Any kind of pitfalls folks should look out for? Some guidance there?
Well, a couple of things I've talked to them about is even the targeted risk assessment. In the past, I've seen large clients, small clients, they don't do a good job of performing a risk assessment. You get clients like you talked about, the infrastructure people where it's pipeline. If there's an issue, there's lives and injury at risk, and that's their focus, not the card data.
Yeah.
Major corporations, if they have a dedicated risk management program, then they'll do a risk assessment well, and they can give a lot of guidance. But most companies don't have that, and that's one of the least well done controls I've seen. Now you get into the targeted risk assessment with each of these controls that you can use it. That's going to be even more difficult for them. So they really need to start thinking about how they want to manage their risk management processes now, so they're not behind the 8 ball down the road. The other thing, totally unrelated to risk management itself, is as you're starting, and it's the companies with the larger scope, greater technology, you have, no doubt you have a number of projects that you're looking to implement over the next year or two. Well, don't lose sight of including those in your plans for PCI for 2025, or you're going to miss the ball and you'll find yourself not in compliance at that point.
Yeah, the other thing I would add to is don't underestimate the effort and the time that's going to take to come into 4.0 compliance. So you want to know what those gaps are, what you need to do, because if you need to invest a significant amount of money, at this point, you essentially have 2 budget year cycles to go through, and better 2 than 1. So it gives you a little more control of where the money goes, how fast you spend it, and where the time is. And to Bob's point, if you're doing other projects, it gives you more time to get those things in and spread out over a little bit more time.
Nice. So what do you, just ballpark, and I know there's no right answer to this, but what do you think kind of level of effort would be for folks who are in mature compliance with the current standard going to 4.0 to pass their, audit?
I think it's kind of hard to even average out, because so many of the required controls are controls that companies have voluntarily implemented anyway.
Right.
Like the SIM, the example I put out there. You already have a SIM, there may not be any additional uplift for you. But if you don't have one, that's a huge uplift.
Yeah.
So it's really hard. A lot of companies and mature organizations will have a documented policy set, including roles and responsibilities. One of the new changes at PCI is a requirement to document not just how you meet the control, but who within the organization has responsibility. And this is on a per section, so there's 12 sections, and 11 of the 12 have a requirement to document who's got that responsibility. So if you're mature, you already have that in place. If you're not, you have a lot of documenting to do, and probably going to lead to a lot of discussions, because now you have to name a person where you never had to before, and that's going to get an organizational structure and potentially political battles and fiefdoms and all that kind of stuff.
And I'll throw a gotcha in there to go along with that too, with identifying responsible people. Right now, before you do that, we've talked, who's doing this work, who's not doing it. As you move forward with the Great Resignation, you don't know what people are going to be in your organization tomorrow, let alone a month or 6 months from now. So you need to have this stuff documented, whether it's the processes, who's responsible, et cetera. You want that organizational knowledge and history to stay in-house, not walk out the door when someone leaves.
Totally.
When we're in an interview doing an assessment, and you hand us a piece of paper that says, I'm going to pick on Jason, Jason's responsible for the firewall infrastructure, we don't want to hear Jason in the interview saying, not my job.
I don't want to see the CISO responsible for the infrastructure either.
We're in big trouble. Yeah. But I think, it's funny. I just kind of thought of this, but it seems like if we're thinking capability maturity model kind of perspective, where we're trying to go from repeatable to defined, this is forcing a lot of those things. So again, from a security perspective, this is a good amount of progress, because and that's what I've been talking about that with a lot of people within our own organization as well, is that if everything's tribal knowledge, you're going to be in big trouble, to your point, Bob, if somebody leaves the organization. I can remember when we were consulting, going out, and we found out that there was in this one, critical infrastructure environment, there was the one guy who basically was the key to just about everything in the organization. And they're like, what are your recommendations? I'm like, you need an armored car to take him back and forth to work, because if you lose this guy, everything falls apart. So I think that it's a good point. And there's probably some scrutiny at a certain point that if it's the same individual for all of those 11 responsibilities, we're in big trouble too, right?
Oh yeah, especially when they span finance and HR. It's like, really? The guy that's dealing with encryption is the guy that's doing the background checks?
Same. Yeah.
Or
Totally could happen.
Communicating with the public and the press.
Yeah, totally. No, good point. Well, guys, a lot of fun. And probably I would say we're going to talk about this at least 2 more times, probably for impending doom time, but also in the middle where you still got time. What are some last thoughts we'd like to leave? We'll go with Bob and then we'll go with Scott.
Plan and document.
How long have we been saying that as security people?
That's the lifestyle of an auditor. Just keep saying that.
Yeah. Love it. Scott?
I don't know if I can add much. I mean, time is your enemy right now. You need to plan and know what you're doing. Give yourself the maximum amount of time. Be ready and understand and know what you need to do to fix and come up to compliance.
No, great point. And I think, again, this can't live at only a certain level of the organization. This has to be exposed all the way up from leadership and all the way down. That's pretty much the way, not just from a successful implementation, but just from the way that security is supposed to work, it should be working that way. So again, this is something that if it hasn't been raised to the ELT within your environment, it's something that they need to be aware of and be confident and have a reporting on. And if you're a member of a publicly traded company, the board's probably going to start asking about this pretty soon.
Yeah, and just to remind everybody, the 4.0 is not the reason for the change. An executive of the company needs to sign off on your compliance. So they're going to have the ultimate liability. If a breach occurs, they're going to be turned into him to say, like, how did this happen? And again, they don't want to hear, I don't know.
Absolutely.
They want to hear.
You just gave me chills up my spine.
Historically, the executive level was held to a reasonable man standard. Nowadays, it's going way beyond that. So you really need to be involved, and you can't use the I don't know anymore.
No such thing as plausible deniability.
Exactly.
Nope, that's what you sign up for when you get that C in front of your title.
Yeah,
so good talk, guys. I appreciate it. For those of you who want to know more about what we do at Insight, especially what we do with PCI, and want to talk to some of these guys, visit us at solutions.insight.com. Thanks so much for your comments. Oh, you know what? I can't leave. I got to do the survey. This is the second time I forgot to talk about the survey, but we surveyed you folks out there and you responded. And it's pertinent, I think, and it's kind of a good way to top off everything. Let me pop that up real quick. So is your organization ready for PCI 4.0? And of the respondents, we got 25% said got it under control, which that to me either means they're thinking about it. I doubt anybody's fully there, but maybe so. We've started preparations was 0%, but I think those two kind of blend, the first two. 50% said it's on the horizon, and 25% said I don't know. So we hope that's not somebody that's in senior leadership of their organization. But anyway, I think that's so we'll have to come back. We'll do this survey again, and we'll bring you guys back. So thanks so much, and thanks everybody out there for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Scott.